Hello, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. Good morning. Hope you're welcome to the second day of Cross-Border Week. Today, we'll be talking with Alessio Alonso, CEO and founder of Pipefy, and he will explain more about the tool and what his history was like to begin as an international company from day one. And today our panel will be more like a chit chat to understand how Pipefy works in the global market. So you're welcome to send us your questions about what you want to know, what you want to learn about. He's had several investment proposals. He has a company in Silicon Valley. So there are a lot of fun things to learn here. So I'll pass the floor to Alessio. Good morning. Thank you for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about Pipefy and give us a background for the people here today? Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's great that you're doing business as Globalfy. You guys are one of our most sophisticated clients and you use our technology as well. And it's nice to see how you're growing. A little bit of Pipefy's history. What was the idea like at first? I worked in turnarounds and I gave consulting for 12 to 14 companies on how to automate processes. And I used to work with Linksys and green belts and black belts to improve processes, reducing costs and improving service. And at the time I was the junior nerd employee. And as we did improvements, someone needed to sit down with the IT department of the companies to implement the changes, either to rethink the process or to automate it. So I was a client in terms of solutions that compete with Pipefy. One of my greatest challenges at the time is that we spent a lot on software development. We always spent with tools that you needed specialized knowledge to operate. And that's when I had the idea of Pipefy. I thought that was years later. I thought if there was a solution, if the business areas could rethink their processes and implement their processes to improve the quality of execution and automate as much as they could that execution. And if they could do that without the need to invest heavy in these legacy tools and the development of customized software tools, that would help companies a lot. So that's how Pipefy was born. It was a trouble I had with the clients. But sometimes it's very expensive and slow to implement. So that's where we noticed a business opportunity for companies who wanted more agility. And in these 7 years, we have been growing and we've been having a great history. We have almost 600 collaborators, 4,000 clients, paying clients. From these 4,000 clients, we have from either you guys as well as Zoom, which is what we're on right now. There are clients, there are governments, banks, there are all sorts of clients using our solution. And what's always nice, because we were able to do that globally from day one, and that helped us have access to capital and bring on and onboard international clients, which is what we wanted from the beginning, and it's also the main reason why we're still alive. And that's what I would like to highlight and go into our conversation, is that a lot of times, depending on the problem that you're working on, being a local provider, it doesn't make you more competitive. It's actually the other way around. The problems that I'm trying to solve, I need a solution. And being a local provider, if it's indifferent, well, usually the client tends to go after the provider who is best in class. And in emerging class markets such as Brazil and other regions, uh, people usually think, well, the global player is probably best because they have scale, they went abroad, so they consider the global player best than the local alternatives. I went through that. We went through a little bit of that prejudice, and when we positioned ourselves to be able to work in all regions, that made us also be able to communicate with our niche of clients, which are the people who are more innovating, more agile, who the people who know how to buy technology and they know that they can automate everything they need. It's easier to do global campaigns, doing content in a global scale. For the person who's looking after that content, the market is much bigger. At the city that we got started in Curitiba, it's harder to find these types of clients. So when you look at the digital channels, it's actually more agile to work globally because you can speak to your target audience, the people who know what you do, who understand and will get value from what you offer. In our case, it was process improvement and automation, be it inside a company using helping their business or someone inside a big consulting firm. So our big clients were Accenture, IBM, and those types of operations because those guys know how to buy technology very well. When they noticed what we wanted to do, they recognized the ROI very quickly. I used to do the same thing here in Curitiba in events, but it was much harder. And do you believe that being a global company from day one made it easier for you to get clients in consulting companies instead of just having a local company in the south of Brazil? The biggest, the bigger the operation, the more risk the client has when they're choosing a provider. So the bigger the operation, the more they're concerned about losing something rather than to win with something. So if you position yourself as a global player and not a smaller regional player, even if it's just in the beginning, that helps the client to be more at ease if because if you have just 5 clients in your startup, but they're good brands with brand awareness, even if you're earning a lot from these clients, that really helps to bring more credibility. So the fact that we act globally and we work with clients in different regions and logos that the market would look at and think, well, if this guy is purchasing this service, then I don't imagine this guy to have a credibility problem. So it helped us to create this sort of pedigree. Well, this guy is at a global level. He can complete at a global level, and there are a few brands on board, people who know what they're paying for. So something I might be concerned about, that's not probably true. So I'll proceed rather than and versus comparing that to a local provider who didn't have that catch. So I think globally, in terms of the size of the operation, because we can't lie and say that we're bigger than we actually are, obviously, but to show that we're used to resolving problems of global complexity and leading with very sophisticated global clients, that made the difference. That's great. And what was it like for you guys to go into different countries? You talked about finding your audience online in a way that's more easy than it is than to look locally. How did you make your marketing team arrive at your target audience at different countries and different languages and different cultures? Can you share a little bit about how that experience was like for you in terms of being able to help the people who are watching and helping them structure their operation and companies to enter other countries? I think that's very interesting because the learning is different. When people usually think about going global with a company, they think about, oh, I'm going to have to move there, or I'm going to have to hire a country manager, or I have to set up an office, or advertise at the region. Well, not necessarily. That will be necessary after a certain scale, but you can be uh, more, you can be tighter and more agile doing things that will take you longer. On Pipefy, there are two things that made the difference. The first one was good use of digital channels, either that is content production or SEO. And we talked a lot about process automation very boldly from the beginning, but also the part about search engine marketing, investing in Google and measuring if we got results or not in the first campaigns. I used to do that directly, actually. And the third, which was the tipping point for us, was that we found online communities that were very uh, big niche, and we presented ourselves and we began selling our product. We did product hubs and found other groups of black belt people. We worked in a niche on these communities, and that was different rather than doing that locally or globally. Another point is sometimes people don't understand uh, the natural pressure or the nature of their product. In our cases, other than the digital channels, there was a very specific trait that made it easy for us to gain the global scale, which was product-led growth. Product-led growth was not just is not just conversion optimization and etc. The thing is that my product is my business card, and my product is the flagship where I'm going to provide value for my target audience. They're going to try out the product, be comfortable with what they saw and experienced, and based on that, I'll try to have a commercial relation, and not the other way around. So we had a product. It's a freemium product, but what happens is that managers in big companies would try it out, and obviously, if I did a code for this guy without him ever knowing about my brand, my conversion rate would be very low in a campaign. But if I have a product that is freemium or has a free trial, and I do a campaign and I try to engage with the target audience, and they're at least exposed to what I'm proposing to do, the conversion rate and responsiveness of this potential client is much bigger than if I needed to do outreach to that person. So the strategy of doing search or inbound and let the client try out the product first. We'll call it a product qualified lead, QL. Well, when we saw him online, we went just like right after his neck, right? If it was, for example, a vice president of IBM operations, then I would call him like 5 times a day for him to try to have him make a call with me. So this trying to have a product that is more transactional, where the client explores it themselves, that made it much easier. That's something that we always talk about as software consumers, that when we're looking for software to implement in the company, and my first step is to schedule a call, then I don't have the opportunity to try out the product and to see how it works, then I just discard it, because I need to understand if it's worth my time and the time of that salesman in the discovery call or not. I need at least a demo of the product or something. It allows me to have access to the tool, because if they're really good, they'll allow that. Whereas instead, I would have to schedule a call with the salesman where they have to try to convince me about the product, where it's actually an SDR, and then we'll have another call about the product. Sometimes it seems that the companies hide the product from their clients. Like, first we'll see if you can use their product or not, and then we'll let you in. And your strategy is the other way around, is to have the freemium and have the little chat to see who's accessing the product and have direct access to the client, and even start collecting usage data from the client before he even uses your service or product, and having intelligence before that you can use before you try to sell the product. Exactly. If the product can't offer that, then certainly you have to use that as a differential. If for any reason the journey to acquire your product is too complex because sometimes there's too many setups or data imports or anything like that, at least you have to compensate with a lot of product marketing. If due to high complexity you can't do that, then you have to do a lot of product marketing, a lot of content, a lot of video, a lot of cases for them to be comfortable enough to be convinced and more inclined to accept or to join a call or take a demo or talk to someone in your team. And that's sometimes it's tricky, because when you look at the best practices for growth and conversions, people say, oh, well, do a landing page with a contact form that has the best conversion and so on. Sometimes you do a campaign like that and optimize for a conversion, but the person didn't have enough information for them to be comfortable enough to advance to the next level. Sometimes they think, well, I have to register. If I register, I need to find out what's on the other side of this gate because I don't understand what this product can do for me. Sometimes you might even have a good conversion rate in a landing page or campaign, but you can't really progress through the funnel well because they're still not convinced that you can deliver value because they either didn't have experience with the product, or you didn't do enough product marketing and information material to explain to them what you can do for them. If it can't be product led 100%, then you need to do a repertoire of things to make that person comfortable. Exactly. And regarding the content and the marketing that you guys have to promote the product, have you always worked in Portuguese and English, or did you only have the focus on in one language in the beginning? We So it was 100% English. Yes, that's great. And what about support? Was it initially just English? Well, support, if we saw Brazilian, we will switch over to Portuguese because it would be easier. But all our documentation and help material is in English. We translated everything long time afterwards. And today you have support in Spanish as well, right? Yes. In terms of assets and marketing support, we cover the three languages: Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And from the point of view of product, we have translations for a few other languages, but we don't provide support or documentation. Documentation, we also don't do in Spanish. It's a challenge, right? For us, it certainly is. Every new language that you open, it's not just the website that needs to be translated. You need to have a sales force in that language, and you need to have support, and we need technical support in our case, and there needs to be someone from the technical team who works with that language. So all of the documentation, all the content, and everything that is produced, the newsletters, is just a huge barrage of things that you need to translate. It's practically a new branch inside the company for each language that you add. It's a lot of volume in terms of work. So I think the initial focus that you had in English, which was the biggest market, that was great. In our case, we started in Portuguese. Our second was Spanish, and English was the last one. We were still pretty focused on Latin America in the beginning, but English has quickly become the largest market, and it surpassed the Portuguese and Spanish. Well, in your case, if they already have an international operation, they probably speak English. So it's much more effective. It makes sense to concentrate on that. Exactly. We've got our first question. Alessio, in terms of marketing and traction, do you have traction for each region or for language? Well, it depends. It's not so easy to answer. You need a dedicated native speaker, because otherwise you can't work with product quality.
On the other hand, performance, not so much. It's more flexible. So the leader of the growth performance area is not Brazilian. He doesn't speak Portuguese at all, but the rest of the team is Brazilian and it works. So it's region agnostic. So it varies. And when we think of teams or squads, sometimes you're going to put a lot of resources into things you don't need to locate. But there are some functions within the team that, yes, you need to think about this localization. Besides marketing, we need to think about, do we need a local sales force, for example? It depends. If it's a transactional product, the pressure isn't that big. But if you're going to work in other ways, sometimes you will need to use a pre-sales maybe that is not native, but the salesperson needs to be native. So you can start analyzing this and think about where you need to invest or not, depending on the job description. That makes sense. Yeah, it's like you said, some positions need the native speaker or this knowledge of the local culture for these interactions. And in other functions, you don't need that. And maybe it's easier to work with someone who is fluent in the language, but is not necessarily native. And how is it for you as a CEO to direct this distributed operation throughout different countries? How do you dedicate yourself? How do you organize your time to be present in more than one location, let's say? So under the perspective of operations, I think it's just about separating each bucket and measuring each bucket's performance. So we have 3 categories: US, Brazil, and others. So Latin America is international for us, non-US, non-Brazil. And most of our structures that have to do with objectives and some teams as well, like our sales team, our customer success team, we have separated them in these buckets. As a CEO, regarding my time, under a practical point of view regarding my teams, I don't see much of a difference. We have Brazilians, we have other people from other nationalities in the teams. We just need to make the schedules work in a tactical manner. I think a big challenge when we start hiring is to pay attention when we look at establishing the regions, sometimes specific paradigms that have to do with the biases of these regions, they start developing. And sometimes this can interfere in the work of the teams. So these issues, let's say, they can arise. This has to do with paradigms in the operations, what you understand as right or wrong. Each region can have its own biases. So this has to do with educating people so they can understand other people's perspectives. And regarding the cultural perspective, this is also relevant, right? People who study international trade know that this cultural element is very relevant. So you need to train people to acknowledge that this bias is real. People from Latin America, they create bonds and they are very relational. So they create bonds with people and they are very concerned about how people feel. So this has an impact because many times you need to read between the lines to understand what people are saying, or the communication takes a long time to happen because they're worried about how the person is going to feel. So the communication is slower because we're worried about how people are going to feel about this communication. If you work with someone from the US or Asia, they just don't care. So that's just, they just say what they have to say, even if it's difficult, and then 10 minutes later, they're having a beer with you. So it's important to be aware about these aspects and have your team be aware of this. Yes, that's what we see in our team and in our clients. So the Latin American client needs a lot more attention. They are very affectionate, both in their complaints and in their compliments. So when they interact with customer support, they thank us very much. They say, we've changed their lives, or they say, no, you destroyed my life with this problem. So everything is very intense regarding our team and the client. So here we have these cultural biases that we need to consider when we are dealing with our target public in a different region. Americans are a lot more direct when they're conducting businesses, and Brazilians or people from other Latin American countries speak and speak and speak. Yes, Brazilians, they communicate in that way. And it's a slow sales process that might not even lead you anywhere. But you can't be fast because that can be perceived as something negative. I've been living in the US for 8 years now, so I understand going straight to the point. But this is something very interesting for us to observe, in that we talk to our clients about this. When they want to become global, they need to operate according to the local market. You can't replicate in the US what works in Brazil because it's not necessarily going to work. And we need to consider the local market. When you're selling to the American market, it's one kind of public. When you're selling to the European market through your American company, it's a different public, a different approach. Even when we're speaking about the pace of things, for example, the European public is calmer, they take their time with things, take their time with making decisions. I think maybe Europeans are somewhere between Americans and people from Latin America. So we need to consider all of this when we are looking at becoming a global company. Absolutely. And this really needs to be considered because it makes a huge difference. Let me take a look here. Daniela is asking if you could have only one e-commerce for all of Latin America. Alessio, would you like to reply since you work with different countries from Latin America? I think you can. You have a kind of easiness regarding the same language for these countries, Spanish speakers. But you need to conduct some analyses on trade-off, because except for Brazil, I don't know if it's B2C, but in B2B, we see that other Latin American regions have clients who are a lot more sensitive to the prices. So these conversion rates for different regions, even though the CAC is lower, sometimes these conversion rates can be lower because of the sensibility of the clients to prices, depending on the region you're working with. So when you work with developed markets like the US, it's the opposite. It's a lot more competitive, but this sensibility to prices is also lower. So I would just look at the economic impact of this. It's not just about commerce and logistics. It's about really the temperature of this model of decision making that has to do with where the client is based. And how do you determine the regions where you will invest the most in? For example, considering all of these aspects of conversion, prices, the public, how do you determine what market you're going to direct your investment towards? We have some strategies that are well defined. The first priority is the US market because it's strategic for us. And we intentionally, actually, a lot of times it's a lot less, it's not as easy as other regions, but it's very competitive and very important for us. So Brazil, we understand it's our backyard. We need to defend it. And it's our base here for funding our expansion to other regions. And in other regions, we have a more economic and transactional approach. You know, we look at the costs for acquisitions. Is it better? It is. Okay. What is the conversion rate like? You know, it's we need to think about all these things. The time zone, for example. How are you going to deal with the time zone if there's a huge difference? You have this window, this time frame window, depending on the business hours, according to each region. Is somebody going to be dedicated to that region so they can work in a different time zone? So things start to get more complex, and we look at all of these things. Okay, does a specific place have a very good advantage? Yes. Can we serve this location? We need to look at this. We really need to look at the details, at the fine print to understand if that region will work or not. I think a lot of people today ask themselves, you know, oh, why not Latin America? Because a lot of people think it's a quick win opportunity. We think of this in a slightly different way. We say, you know, we still are going to reach the limit of our backyard, which is Brazil, and in the US as well. So for me to make an economic decision of not putting these dollars to expand in Brazil or the US, which is strategic for us, and explore a third region instead of that, I need to have a really good argument for doing this. Yes, it has to do with not investing, right? Versus where you invest, because there are so many options that you kind of need to think, okay, where do we want to focus instead of where are we going to diversify our expansion towards? Yes, exactly. And it's quite a paradigm because sometimes we have these conversations, okay, let's start exploring Latin America, you know? And I was trying to hire an executive from a big company, and I found out that this person in Brazil, he made like 10 times more money than we do. And I said, wow, he's 10 times bigger than us in Brazil. So why am I going to think about other regions right now? I think it's important for us to think of these things. I want to ask you about investments afterwards, but I'm going back to the chat now. In the English speaking countries, what is the experience like with Asia, or is the focus in the US? Our focus is mostly in the US. We work with Asia in very specific cases, or we serve Asia or operate in Asia because of trade opportunities with clients we have in the US. Because we work with big companies, for example, that are from the US, but they have businesses in Asia. So we have a structure for support for dealing with these time zones. But we do not have a proactive policy right now for that region. Okay, another question here from Alexandre Fonseca. How did you deal with the aspects of regional adaptation in countries regarding the products? So regional processes with different characteristics. Okay, I'm going to divide this into two areas because we have the technical part and then the process-based part. So the technical part has to do with conducting the translations, translating all of the documents into English or into the local language. I think that there's actually a good solution for this called Phrase App that I recommend. And this is important. You need to do this from the get-go because you need to have your most important material in the local language, even if you have it in English. So this is important. This is my suggestion. Develop this from the beginning, even if you are only working with one language. The second point is about processes, and yes, it makes a huge difference. Depending on your workflow, for example, if you're dealing with HR processes, you have legislation issues. It's not just cultural. You have different legislations in Europe, in the US, and Brazil, and each region needs a specific approach. Something else we've learned that I think is worth considering is the level of competitivity in these areas within these regions. So sometimes because of historical issues or legislation issues, these can have a big impact on what we do. Sometimes a specific market is a lot easier to enter than another. So considering competitivity and the players, the specialized players that are active in the region, this is something very important to understand and to consider. So it has to do with the maturity of the ecosystem in the region. It makes a difference. Okay, great. If you would like to say anything else, please send it to us via the chat. So I just want to give an example of this. So the security of information and compliance. Brazil is 5 to 10 years behind the US. Yeah. We tried hiring a software for client onboarding here in the US. But they did not serve Europe because we could not have a European client accessing this software because they were only qualified for the US and Latin America, but not for Europe. So there are many points we need to consider regarding local regulations and who is going to be using the software or the solution that you are offering. Okay, so I want to change the subject a little bit now. Let's get out of this technical part and speak about investments. How was this journey regarding investments for you? And what was the impact of the fact that Pipefy is a global company in its investments? Yes, that made a huge difference. And it's important to understand how the industry works because people think, oh, I'm going to get on a plane, I'm going to Silicon Valley, and I'm going to Mountain View, and I'm going to find investors in the US, and then my problems will end. That's not that simple. How does the software industry work? In a venture capital fund, you have a mandate and you have a base for these investments. So when this fund gets $1 billion to invest in tech companies, if it's in the US, usually there is a definition that says, okay, we are investing in American companies in the health area, enterprise software, and e-commerce, for example. So in these definitions, many times they also say, okay, we are only going to work with early stage, so checks from $100,000 to $500,000. You can't get to a soft bank and expect $100,000 because this fund has a very specific investment mandate regarding what kind of business they're going to invest in. When you're speaking about venture capital funds, when they raise funds to invest them in Latin America, what are they saying to their investors? They're saying, look, yes, this is riskier. We have more political risks. We are dealing with different currencies, but I'm going to deliver something that is a little bit more profitable for you because the venture capital market is less competitive. So the profitability is better. So think about this. If the risk between investing in Brazil and the US were exactly the same, I'm an American investor, let's say. So I am retired and I have a retirement fund. Why would I invest in a Latin American company instead of investing in a company that, for example, I can just cross the street in my local city and see how they're doing? So emerging regions mean more risk, but they also mean a greater return. That is why a lot of people complain and say, oh, the evaluation of Latin American countries is lower than the valuation of companies in the US. I'm sorry, but that is the political, economic, and fiscal cost that Latin America has. That is how the industry works. So if you want to raise funds, if you're only operating regionally, you need to understand that fund. You need to understand what they are investing in, because otherwise you're going to waste your time. The second point here is, okay, I have global aspirations. I want to get an American investor because I want to be successful in the US. That is the second point of your learning experience, okay? Investors don't simply click on an I believe button. You cannot try and get an American investment because you want to enter the American market unless you have some kind of sampling, a qualitative sampling, for example, of American clients that are already happy with your product. So you need to have something to show so that person can look at you under a different perspective. So they can say, oh, wow, look, this person is already successful in this. They have some clients. Maybe he is a diamond in the rough. And okay, I'm going to take this person out of this country and I'm going to help them to sell in the US, which is a much bigger market. And that is what Zendesk did, for example. You know, the investor said, wow, you're already successful outside of here. When you enter this market, it's going to go really well. So you need to understand that you need to have at least this minimum sampling to prove yourself. A lot of Brazilian entrepreneurs seek me out and say, okay, I want to be global. And I say, okay, first of all, you need to get the first clients to show that you can sell this.
And something that happens a lot, and we get this question from our clients and our leads, is at what moment do they need to set up a company here if their purpose is to get capital? If they have already a software developed and they want to come to the American market and they want to get investments, it's very common for them to ask us, what structure should I use? Do I open a company now? Do I get the funds first and then the company? Do I start as a corporation or an LLC? What do I do? What is the order? What comes first, the egg or the chicken? First, the investment to open the company, or the company first and start getting sales, and then I try to get an investor. Maybe in your experience, the answer might depend on case by case basis. So what do you recommend for someone who has a validated product and has a solution in the local market and they want to bring it to the American market to expand and get investments in the United States? I think that if the person has connection, they need to prepare, because you want to look local for the local investors, the American investors, and the less noise and things to fix, the better. You need to have conviction. If you need to run tests and have clients in the United States and you already have clients, then it's worth incorporating locally, not just for the investors, but for the commercial relations with the client as well. Because if the invoice is for Congo, the company, the client's going to say, whoa, wait a minute. At least they're going to have questions. If they need to do an exchange, a currency exchange to hire you, that's sort of like a noise. So it's important to iron that out because there are several service providers who help you with that. But it's important to sit down and have a structure, not just in terms of investments, but to also earn locally as well. Yes, that makes sense. And we're back at that point of that if you want to act locally, you need to be there locally. You can't just position yourself as an American company and send an invoice from Congo because otherwise that wouldn't make sense. Well, I have nothing against that. Okay, but that's what the client is thinking. They're thinking, am I going to have to make an international invoice? I'm not going to have to do a currency exchange. It's just another it's another obstacle that you need to solve to be at that local market. Guys, we're reaching the end of our conversation with Alessio. I have a last question with Daniela, and then we're gonna close. All right. For those who have a product who isn't yet validated in the local market for a small niche. So what about for those who didn't validate their product in the local market? Is it worth going global? I think that you're still in that validation. I think about startups, your first clients, you need to be very close to them. They're probably going to buy from you because they trust in you as a person. And to validate that initially, acting locally, I think it makes it easier. The first validations, the first 40 sales meetings I did, I was there, I implemented it. And a lot of what we are today is based on the learnings that I had with the close interactions with these clients. The first version of Pipefy, you just wouldn't take off. And one of my clients was one of my friends, and he owned a co-working operation. And I said, how come you're not using this product? You paid for it. And he said, I haven't had time. He went to a cafe and he said, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I don't know how to draw out my process. And I said, don't you have a process bank, or can't you copy the process from someone else? Because I just need to hire employees for the company. And I just said, I need to have a template library. And that was a turning point for us. And now we have a library of templates. So, if you're not ready to go, it just won't take off. If it's still in validation, then you should stick to who you're closest to, at least at first. We are users of Pipefy. We have hundreds of processes in it, and we still use the template library. So that tip is still valid. So guys, we're going to close now. You're all welcome to get to know Pipefy. It's an excellent tool for recognizing processes. We use it a lot at Globalfy. And if it is without a doubt what allowed us to scale and allowed us to grow throughout the years without breaking our processes. It's a unique tool that helps you manage the general processes of the company without having to resort to several other specialized tools. So instead of having an HR tool, one for sales, one for support, one for processes, one for marketing, you can customize everything inside of Pipefy and work with your entire team with just one tool in a way that's integrated without having to worry about dealing with different service providers and having to invest in different tools that won't communicate among themselves. So Pipefy is my recommendation, pipefy.com. Alessio, thank you so much for your participation here and sharing your experience in the construction of Pipefy as well as in the global market. And guys, thank you so much for being here. You don't need to leave the Zoom room. In a few minutes, we'll go to another interview talking about global payment methods, which will be conducted by Diego. You can take a break to have some water or go to the bathroom, and we'll continue here in this room through the same link. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I hope you, thanks a lot. Goodbye.